Hey, David.
Hey, Steve.
I'm not sure. I don't think you've joined a PeerPods call before. Is that right?
I've joined, I think, once as a listener.
Mhm.
Mm.
Cool. Welcome. Yeah, it's a bit quiet so far. I was expecting to have a few more people back now, but we'll give it a minute or two and see who else is able to join. The agenda is very light this week anyway, so saying that, do you have a link to the agenda or do you want me to post it in the chat?
Um, I think Slack.
Yeah, I think it's pinned in Slack, but otherwise I'll pop a link in the Zoom chat.
Meeting.
Check.
Is there any continuation of the work that was done for sealed secrets?
That's a great question. So probably Magnus, who normally joins, is probably the best to ask. I think he did a prototype of doing runtime key release. I don't know if that was using sealed secrets or not. But I think it was interacting with the confidential data hub. But I'm not sure the source of that secret. It's something in PeerPods, we're kind of still on a little bit of a journey to catch up with all of the um, confidential computing aspects of the Cocoa project. We kind of started just as a PeerPods being able to spin up the pod elsewhere, but weren't as worried about attestation, all of that extra stuff. So we're not quite, and we started after the local hypervisor did. So we're kind of a little bit delayed. So we've not, in the open source, we've not exploited all of those features at the moment. We also, I don't know if you know about the CCV0 merge to main sort of effort that's going on, in that all of the early development work for confidential containers in the Kata containers project went into a branch called CCV0, not the main branch, so isn't supported. And we are now migrating it into main, but that means we're kind of a bit in limbo on PeerPods, where some of the stuff we want to use is in main, but not everything. Like at the moment, even image pull isn't supported. So we would likely, in the short-term development, switch to use main, but then things like sealed secrets will be broken as they are not available in main. But by the time we get to the 0.9 release, we should have full confidential data hub and sealed secrets support available in local hypervisor, and then we can start making sure we can exploit and test them in PeerPods. But in open source, I'll say that carefully, in open source, we don't have any E2E tests for anything like sealed secrets. My understanding is some of the probably quite a few of the different parties who have their own in-house versions are using sealed secrets or equivalent. So yeah, I'm not sure if that helped to answer your question, but yeah, it's not very well exposed, but it will be coming. Everything's a bit unstable and in flux with the merge to main at the moment.
Then just give a bit background. Why did I ask? I'm looking at confidential computing from a security standpoint, trying to review attack vectors on the enclave that start by assuming that confidential computing works, and then goes on to check what in confidential containers breaks the security, which is mainly the interaction with a Kubernetes system and all the information flowing from the Kubernetes system. This is why I'm asking. And a couple of other aspects which are related to workload security versus just a single VM, protecting a single VM. I'm still exploring. It's very hard to follow the code right now, where things are and how the information flows. But my goal is at the end of the day to try and improve the security in the sense of identifying, okay, this is an attack vector, this is an attack vector, we have to handle that one, that one, that one, so on.
Cool.
So,
yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. So I would say generally we have discussed threat models around particularly PeerPods, but even in the main confidential local hypervisor confidential containers, there was some early work that one of my colleagues, James McGowan, did in coming up with threat models. I don't think that has been updated particularly recently. So yeah, I would say at the moment we don't have a particularly great elaborated system of what are potential extra threats that PeerPod has or what the attack vectors are and stuff like that. So I don't think we've got documented that stuff that you would be particularly interested in. But it's great to have you to potentially ask those questions and point out those things that you want so that we can try and adapt to that. So now, yeah, welcome to Magnus and Suraj. A question that came up that you might have dabbled with more, guys, is yeah, Deb was asking about sealed secrets and PeerPods. I don't know if you guys have played with that in the open source version or not. And I know Magnus, you've done more stuff around attestation and runtime key release and stuff. So I don't know if that has gone into sealed secrets area.
No, I didn't test this really, but I would expect that it would work like in other Kobo setups, because it's essentially a higher level protocol that kind of sits on the payload of Kubernetes secrets, I think. So I mean, I think there's also not. It's also not completely clear that this kind of transparent replacement or yeah, shadowing of confidential secrets with Kubernetes secrets is conceptually 100% sound. I think there might be ways where an administrator who owns etcd could inject secrets which are not confidential into the workload. And the workload, assuming that it's dealing with confidential secrets that are obscure to the infrastructure owners, are not used, but other secrets are used. So this sounds a bit contrived, but if you think of, for example, pre-signed URLs that are often used in batch jobs in data science, where they do some calculations and then they push something to a bucket or a storage account. And the secret is a pre-signed URL that can post to the bucket, so they don't have to go through all the IAM set up. And here you could, for example, have a container do their super secret calculations and then post the results to something that the workload owner didn't intend to. So this is like, there's a lot of subtleties in this, where if we mix Kubernetes secrets with confidential information, I think there's pitfalls, and I'm not sure whether we have systematically considered whether this is something that makes sense. I think Tobin has some deeper thought on this, on like what it means, for example, for signatures that are not really confidential, and that if you treat them as confidential, it has introduces certain problems.
Maybe we can start the agenda.
Yeah, sure. I will start screen sharing. Yeah, thanks for that information, Magnus. I was also explaining we're in a slightly difficult position with merged domain, where something like sealed secrets, we have the confidential data hub and stuff in at the moment, but that requires the Kata agent to launch the process, and that might go away for a brief amount of time when we move to be based on main, depending on when that time frame is. So hopefully back on 0.9 will be steady again. So the agenda is very, very, very light this week. There's just an item that I wanted to flag up based on.
It's also very small. Can you?
Am I sharing
hard
the
to
right
read.
screen? Sorry, I'm sharing the wrong screen. That's why. Is that any better?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry. Oh, yeah. I was sharing my notes of the meeting rather than the Google Notes. So, yeah, so we got the, sorry, yeah, I was mentioning, so it's change, which sort of got a little bit prematurely merged, I think, yesterday, which was a PR I was doing to fix, well, to address the fact we had a individual, well, the intention was to have an individual, by whoever wrote it, namespace per test, but the way it was implemented, every test ran under default. So there was an issue to be like Kata containers and basically switch to have an E2E namespace, so that if something goes wrong, you can just kill the whole namespace and clean things up, which during testing, stuff went wrong quite a bit. So it was quite, or I aborted runs during tests, and then just being able to wipe a namespace is useful. So it wasn't a particularly challenging change. We just went in and got rid of a bunch of duplicated code and stuff. The problem we found was on occasional runs, we got, what's the error? We got an error with the service account in the namespace not being found. I don't know if this is something to do with the PeerPods control, because I think that creates the service account. It worked fine in the test run on the PR, so it got merged, and I don't know if it works on the daily. I can't remember. Yeah, we had an error on daily, which might be related. But yeah, I've seen I was kind of debugging it as the PR got merged. No, it's not the same error we hit. This is different. But so I guess I just wanted to flag that up to people that there is potentially this issue. Oh, it's Pridip to join us. Hey, Pridip.
Hey, Steve, sorry, we had our internal meetings and that got extended.
Yeah, no worries. So yeah, I'm just I'm not sure when you joined, just flagging up. So the I saw this issue when running stuff locally, which I think might be related. It's possibly related to the PeerPod controller. I'm not 100% sure, but we might need to back out this change. But if you spot the error, I've not established what caused it, why it failed for me, but didn't fail in the CI. But if you spot an error around the service account and this new namespace, then please let me know and I'll just pull the plug and back this out. As it got a little bit merged beforehand, so just wanted to flag that up to everybody. Don't want it to block anything. Obviously, if people have got an idea of what might be a possible cause, then that would be also interesting. But if it's more than a one-off, and I see it again, then I'll raise an issue for it to reflect it. But at the moment, it's just something I was debugging as the PR got merged. So.
But if you look at the error, it says that it is so the error looks like it is unable to even create this pod because the service account default is not found.
Yeah.
So do you? So default will always be created in the namespace. So maybe we can check if there is some error previously, or is this in your environment, or where did you see this?
Yeah, this was in my environment that I created yesterday. I've re-kicked it off and rebuilt it based on the main yesterday. Sorry, this morning. It was in an environment that I was doing the policy testing as well. So I was kind of switching between, excuse me, the same cluster. I was switching between doing policy testing on your stuff and namespace testing. So I thought I'd maybe got things in a bit wrong. Yeah, and as Raj says, could just be something flaky. But the thing that makes me more worried about it, it's not the right one, is the nightly IBM cloud tests, I think, failed with this issue.
Okay.
So that's where I've gone. It shows me the results. Okay, maybe I misread. Yeah. You can see in here we hit it on the nightly. I say that IBM Cloud tests, we're actually testing lib in them as well, because we test it for S390X and AMD 64. In theory, the AMD 64 should be the same as the ones that are hosted on open source, but you can see like the S390 passed, the AMD 64 didn't. So this is where I'm a bit confused about what is. How is it happening? This is the second time I've seen it now. That's why I was a bit more worried about it and trying to reproduce it again today.
It looks like a permission error because it says forbidden, so it's not able to look up. Like something is not able to look up any service accounts or access any service accounts.
Yeah. So
what happens? Yeah. So what happens is that this default, any pod will use the default service account in the namespace, and if you at least the error to me, what it points out it is unable to get the service account in this specific namespace, and that's why it's unable to create the pod. Now this could be a race, Suraj, as you say, because we create the namespace, but usually when we create the namespace, the service account is created. Maybe there is, or it could be something totally different and manifesting in this error.
Yeah. So I'll start by, I think, so I added a change based on Dali's review, which is ensure the namespace is active before we do any tests. But maybe the next step I should do is start logging what the service accounts within that namespace and make sure default is there. And it might be we just need to wait for that. So yeah, thanks very much for that suggestion. Yeah.
If we just use the latest code and run E2E, most likely we should face it, right? So if at all, if it is not a race condition, maybe we try it in our setup and see if can we create it.
Yeah. That's a bit which, because it is not always there, and I've not. That's why race condition feels like it might be likely, because I saw it once, couldn't reproduce it, and then saw it overnight. But yeah, that's very helpful. So I'll say maybe race condition. Cool. So I guess we'll go on to next one, which is relatively late, a late edition. So yeah, Predictor, do you want to lead us on object storage and security?
Yes. So this has come up again in some other context. So we know, so okay, we have some CSI solution, but we don't have like it's a proper one, if for lack of better words. So one of the things, okay, so when people are deploying LLMs, or at least the large language models and other foundation models, which are pretty big, so they are kind of pulling it from, and those are typically kept in the S3 or blob storage, right? That's one. And then there is also data that is stored in object storage. Now the question is how it is made available. Now one is when there are like workloads which is already connecting to the object store and copying and all, that's fine because that works as is, no issues there. But then there is also another aspect where the workload directly is not doing that. It is made available via persistent store or a similar mechanism. And this is the question that came both in the context of AWS and Azure. Like AWS supports, they provide a thing like S3 mount point, which mounts a remote S3 storage as a local drive inside in the VM or a container, right? And likewise, block fuse is also there. Now the question is, if this model is used in the confidential containers case, does that create any security implication? That's the question. Now, technically, it works. It can be used multiple ways to use that. One is the block fuse. It can be part of the pod itself, where the first thing is it mounts and then it uses. That's one. Or another option we tried successfully is to have block fuse or S3 mount point as part of the pod VM image itself to mount the relevant blob storages. Now the question that is unclear, technical, yes, but the implications of that in the context of confidentiality, anyone more familiar? I mean, I'm looking at people who are more aware of the threat model, and are there any concerns or something to watch out for, or this is okay? That's something. It's mostly like question, not really any technical changes that we need to do or things like that, but purely from a threat model, from security implications, is this okay to use, or we should look at something else, or we should recommend something else to the users? I just wanted to highlight this. We don't need to do anything right now. There are no answers, but if someone has, maybe they can update the issue with their comments. Sorry, Magnus, I maybe spoke over you.
I think the difference, at least like from our perspective, is if we go with something like the something that we build as part of the I don't know, PeerPods control plane, if you want. So something that is in the TCP, but not really owned by the customer. And I think this is probably harder for the project, because then you have to give all sorts of guarantees for this. I think the easier, if you can get away with this, is pretty much prescribe a way to use storage on AWS, on Azure, in the form of, I don't know, privileged sidecar containers or whatnot. But if we build this really into the pod VM image, this means also a bit of a shift of the responsibility. So I would be if we're able to get away with an option that is feasible for the customers to deal with it in their domain, I think this would be preferred. I mean, there's probably other serverless container environments that have the same issue, like Fargate, for example. We could look into how CSI is used in this context, and maybe learn a bit from those implementations. But yeah, I think it's very hard to give a generic answer to say like this is this will give you a guaranteed confidential solution. It's maybe more a matter of there are a few ways like how we can showcase how to do this securely. Like for example, in a PyTorch use case, where you have like client-side encryption, transparent, so the workload reads data frames from a data storage, but certain columns or whole rows are encrypted, and they are decrypted by keys that are only available to a confidential instance. So this, from my perspective, would be something that you could show customers as a reference architecture to securely and confidentially access or perform those computations on large data.
Do you have any pointers, Magnus, which you can maybe add here?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think we have a few, but it's a general idea. I mean, just like there's tons of ways to do this, but what you generally do, you have an SDK that's tied to S3 or to Azure, and instead of relying on just the encryption on the server side, you can have like symmetric key, transparent decryption.
Will that be the first one where the SDKs are used to directly talk? Okay.
Exactly, but you need to have you need to give it tweak it in some way. I think there's not all frameworks work with this. I think PyTorch probably does.
Yeah, that's true. Not every framework does that, but I also getting back to your earlier the previous comment. We add this to PodVM. You are right in the sense that it adds to the TCV. Now we may not want to do, customer wants to do, but then we might need to give some guidance. But if you look at the second one, there is indeed a way using like post-start hook, or this sidecar cannot be used. Or maybe the latest sidecars can be used, because what happens, what we found out is, if the way it works, right, it actually does a fuse mount, and if it is like in an init, of course we cannot do it on an init container because it dies, and if it is like a normal sidecar, then the mount point is not shared between the different containers. So what worked is the post-start hook, where as the hook, or maybe or there was another one where the entry point was itself changed to mount the storage first and then do the rest of the stuff. But the sidecar thing didn't help here because since it mounts, the mount point is not shared between different containers of the pod. So it was, the data was not well. So, but there is
because the CVM PeerPod VM is not a node, so you cannot even share like
Yes.
folders across. Yeah, okay, this makes sense.
But yeah, I think and this but getting back to if customers themselves want to do, what would be what should be a way to tell them, like whether it is a right thing to do, or because there is also this aspect. Some customers are very good with the confidentiality aspects and they know what is needed, what is not. But some are also like very new. They know the concept and they want to use it, but then these questions comes up. So in your opinion, what will be a good way to, should we tell it is better to avoid this approach and look at either one or using directly in the entry point or things like that, and not embedding into the image, or if they are okay and they embed it and then the disk is measured, it should be okay to do.
I mean, I think it would be nice if we would have a set of reference architectures for this. Like if you want to do this, I mean, the what you describe here is probably a very popular use case. So we want to have a way to tell customers this is how you do it, and we should probably work on this. It's probably there will be use cases which we don't cover, and then we need to understand them and see how we can map it. I think it's, yeah, if you just mount an S3 into your pod and then perform the calculations on it, out of the box, there's no confidentiality guarantees. Like it's, if you plug in some random hard disk from your cloud vendor, so there's no guarantee we can give here, and it's probably almost certainly subverts confidentiality. That's I mean, that's a bit of the problem from the other end, to saying, okay, this is exactly what we allow. Like, it's easier to say than, like, yeah, making sure we understand every possible scenario which could subvert confidentiality, because it is a lot harder. So that's what I'm suggesting. So rather, it's trying to understand what customers want and trying to model this into this kind of reference use cases. Maybe we should even have this in the repo.
Makes sense. Yeah. And this is a common one, because for this whole generative AI, where the models are so large, right, for inference, and then there is, of course, the fine tuning of the models where the data is in S3. So I think these cases, you're right, maybe having some sort of a reference will be helpful, so that, and this is common pattern also, people are asking this, so having some guidance in one place also will be helpful for us, most likely, because we can just point everyone to that instead of handling it separately, individually.
Indeed.
Thanks very much. So yeah, if you have more comments, Magnus, you can just add it there, and I will also see if maybe we can ask in the channel if there are any volunteers for creating some sort of a reference design or guidance, or where we need to probably maybe write the problem statement in a way which makes it easier. So maybe I'll also share it in the channel to see if anyone is interested. Otherwise, we can see how to make progress.
Cool, thank you. And yeah, I think it's probably one of falls into quite a lot of the areas we've discussed about trying to get documentation and make things a bit more accessible and easy, and for people like David who are interested in the threat model, try and work a bit better on exposing that, whilst obviously we're we're focused on trying to get features and parity and stuff in, but we also need to try and make it usable by people as well. So thanks for raising it. Thanks for the good discussion. I guess the next one is just a question. I don't know, based on people on the call, if we're likely to have an answer, but go ahead, Brigitte.
Yeah, it's just a question. We know that recently AWS has released the SCV, SNMP instances are there. And the question is more like the attestation support that we have, the regular AMD SCV, SNMP. Did anyone try it out just for test, or does it work? Before I kind of tries to understand, because it's always good if someone has already tried, it works, it's good. If it doesn't work, we know from where we are starting, and that's why I just had this question. So that's about it.
Yeah, I think Paul might have been your best bet from this call, but I guess it might be worth asking in the confidential containers SCV, SMP channel as well. See if any of them played around with that.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, one challenge I see. So I think if the AWS guest code is just able to access. So I'm pretty sure it won't work out of the box, because I think AWS has not the VSEC architecture, but a different one, VLAC or something, and we might not be able to verify this in the verify out of the box. So there's something that is maybe, if you want to look into this, it's probably, I wouldn't even start to run full Coco setup. I would just try to run KBS and guest utilities and see whether you can get this to work. Because if the KBS is able to process and verify the evidence from those machines, then it will very likely work. But I don't think it will out of the box, and it's probably something that you would need to add to the SCV SNP verifier. This is something that maybe as a pointer helps. So there's an E2E test suite on KBS that takes parts of guest components, produces an evidence, and performs a remote attestation on the same machine. This is way easier to debug than trying to run a Coco setup first and see whether remote attestation works. This I can recommend. Yeah, trying this first.
Yeah, I think that's good, because I was also looking at something which is very simple to start with rather than the full stack. So what you just suggested, so I'll spin up an AWS ACV SNMP instance, and then can set up the environment and run the E2E KBS test on the same instance, right? To see if things are working.
Exactly. I mean, I will link, see. So I will put the link to the workload in the chat, which is a good reference on what you need to get going. Yeah, but the idea is you start this in on one of those instances and see whether it works, because there's a detection, an auto detection of TE environments. Yeah, you see, like in the on line 54 for the sampler tester, we set an env, which is the heuristic to pick up the dummy tester. If you don't have this, it will actually go through properties of the TEs and try to find the best fitting one. And if you have an SEV guest device, I think, then it will use the SNP evidence, or try to create SNP evidence, and then it will get verified. So this is yeah, a pretty easy way to check whether things work, and then you can also see where it fails exactly.
Thanks, Magnus. Yeah, I will try this one.
Cool. Any other questions or things anyone wants to raise today? Okay. We'll end it there for this week. And yes, thanks everyone for joining. And yeah, I'll speak to you on Slack or on one of the other Cocoa meetings soon, probably.
Thank you.
Cool. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, folks. Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.